I had always prided myself on my professionalism, on my ability to remain composed in the face of adversity. But as I sat across from Damon Shore, the new CEO of Calridge Equity Partners, I found that composure slipping away. The heavy oak desk between us seemed like a barrier, an impassable wall separating the past from the future. He was shuffling papers, not meeting my gaze. "We're restructuring the senior management tier," Damon said, his voice cold and impersonal. "Your position has been eliminated." I sat motionless, my hands folded neatly in my lap. The same position I had maintained through countless meetings over the past 32 years at Calridge. The shock of his words hit me like a ton of bricks, but I didn't show it. I had been through market crashes, hostile takeovers, and countless corporate storms over the years, but nothing had prepared me for this. "I see," I replied, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "May I ask about the timing?" "I'm scheduled to retire in less than 8 weeks." Finally, Damon looked up, but his expression didn't betray any sign of regret or empathy. It was all business. "The restructuring timeline is non-negotiable," he said. "We need to implement these changes immediately to meet our quarterly projections. Human Resources will handle your exit package. They're waiting for you now." I nodded, rising to my feet with the same grace I had carried throughout my career. I had spent 32 years building Calridge from a regional investment office into a nationally respected financial institution, and in the blink of an eye, it was all gone. My departure was reduced to a cold, impersonal transaction. "Thank you for the opportunity to serve Calridge," I said, extending my hand, my voice steady. "I wish you and the firm continued success." Damon shook my hand briefly, already reaching for his phone. "Security will escort you to clear out your office," he added, dismissing me with his words. As I walked out of his office and toward the elevator, the weight of his dismissal sank in. My name was Harriet Vaughn, and I had been the Senior Vice President of Operations at Calridge for more than 3 decades. But in that moment, none of that seemed to matter. All that remained was the box of personal items I was taking with me. I couldn't help but think about everything I had built, all the relationships I had forged over the years. I thought about my retirement party, the congratulatory emails that had already started arriving from clients and partners, the transition plan I had spent months crafting to ensure a seamless handoff. All of it was meaningless now. Laura, my assistant for the past 12 years, was waiting by my office door. Her eyes were red, and I could tell she had been crying. "I just heard," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "This is outrageous, Harriet." I squeezed her hand, trying to offer comfort despite the chaos swirling inside me. "It's business, Laura. Nothing personal," I said, though the words felt hollow. It wasn't personal to Damon, but it sure felt personal to me. As I gathered my belongings, photos, a potted plant, and a coffee mug my grandson had painted for me, the security guard Kevin, whom I had personally hired 7 years ago, stood silently by. He looked mortified, his face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry about this, Mrs. Vaughn," he said quietly. "It doesn't seem right." "Don't worry about it, Kevin," I said with a soft smile, though the pain of the situation was gnawing at me. "You're just doing your job." I placed the box in my trunk and turned to face him one last time. "How's your daughter doing at university? Still pursuing engineering?" Kevin looked surprised that I remembered. "Yes, ma'am. Made the dean's list last semester," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "She's doing great. She'll go far." "Wonderful," I said, closing the trunk and giving him a nod before walking away. As I looked back at the towering Calridge building, I couldn't help but feel a sense of finality. This was the end of one chapter, and I wasn't sure how I felt about it. The firm I had helped build from the ground up was no longer mine. I drove home through the familiar streets of Lexington, the early evening sunlight casting long shadows over the neighborhood. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Confusion, disappointment, and a strange sense of relief. It wasn't the way I had imagined leaving Calridge, but there it was, a finality that felt both freeing and suffocating at the same time. When I arrived home, my husband Thomas was waiting for me in the kitchen. He looked up, his face instantly registering concern as he saw the box in my hands. "You're home early. What happened?" he asked, his voice laced with confusion and worry. He set down his cup of coffee, his eyes narrowing. "This is not like you. You always had a plan for everything." I've been restructured, I said quietly, setting the box down on the kitchen counter. The weight of the words settled heavily in the room, and for a moment, all I could do was stare at the box. 32 years of my life packed into something so small and insignificant. Restructured? Thomas repeated, his face flushing with indignation. You're retiring in 2 months. They can't just do that. His anger was palpable, but I couldn't bring myself to feel the same way. The initial shock had worn off, leaving only the hollow emptiness inside. It's done, Thomas, I said firmly, trying to sound more composed than I felt. No point getting worked up about it now. I turned to face him, watching the frustration build in his movements as he paced the kitchen. You've built half their client relationships. You're the reason Mary and Ba invested with them in the first place. Have you called Charles? He's going to be furious when he finds out. I shook my head, trying to quell the thoughts swirling in my mind. I haven't called anyone yet. I did think about it, but I'm not going to make a scene. I'll deal with it quietly. It's how I've always done things. I glanced down at the box again, my hands restless. I have dinner with Eleanor tonight. I'll talk to her. Thomas stopped pacing. Eleanor Blackwood was one of my oldest and most trusted friends, the president of Zentran Global and a powerful figure in the world of investment banking. We had been meeting regularly for years, not only as colleagues, but as friends. Are you going to tell her? He asked, his voice softer now. I'm not going to hide it, but I'm not going to complain either, I said, meeting his gaze. The truth was, I didn't know how to feel. The years I had spent building Calridge, mentoring my team, developing relationships with clients, and growing the company felt meaningless now. My whole career had been reduced to a termination letter and a box of personal items. I just have to go through the motions, I added quietly. I've always done my job with integrity. I've never raised my voice, never made threats. I just did my work and let my results speak for themselves. As I changed for dinner, I couldn't help but think about the people I had mentored over the years, the team members I had helped promote, the colleagues I had grown alongside. What would happen to them now? Under Damon's leadership, I feared they would be left to flounder. The firm I had spent over 3 decades building was now in the hands of someone who saw it as little more than a project to be tweaked and altered for short-term gains. I arrived at Mercer's, the upscale steakhouse where Eleanor and I had shared many meals over the years. She was already seated when I arrived, her sharp mind as keen as ever despite her age. At 68, she had successfully grown Zentran Global into a multi-billion-dollar powerhouse. She stood as I approached, offering a warm hug before sitting down across from me. Harriet, she said, her eyes narrowing as she took in my troubled expression. What's going on? You look like you've been through the ringer. I hadn't planned on diving into the details of what had happened, but Eleanor was perceptive, and I knew she wouldn't let me dodge the subject. As we settled in and ordered our usual drinks, bourbon for her, gin and tonic for me, I found myself telling her about Damon's decision and the shock of being fired just 2 months before my retirement. Cal fired you? Eleanor's voice was incredulous. 2 months before your retirement? It's idiotic. What are they thinking? I sighed and shrugged, trying to make sense of it. The new CEO is trying to make his mark. Restructuring is standard practice, right? Standard practice? This is insane, she said, her voice dropping to a lower register. Especially when the person you're firing is the one who built the investor relationships that are the backbone of this company. What about Charles Denham? You've had that golf game with him for how long now? I felt a flicker of surprise. You know about our Thursday games? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Everyone knows Harriet, she replied with a wry smile. The 3 of you control nearly $200 million of Calridge's investment capital. It's not something that flies under the radar. I leaned forward, my heart racing slightly. Charles called me after our last game, she continued, her voice lowering to a whisper. He's been worried about Damon's direction. He doesn't like that the company's moving away from relationship-based investments and into more algorithm-driven strategies. He was already nervous, but your firing confirmed his fears. I let the information settle in, my thoughts now racing in a different direction. I hadn't realized just how much was riding on the relationships I had built over the years. Charles, who had been loyal to Calridge for nearly 2 decades, was reconsidering his investment. That alone was enough to send ripples through the company. But now I knew just how bad things had become. "And what did you tell him?" I asked, my voice quiet. Ella Lennar took a sip of her bourbon before answering. "I told him, as long as you were there to keep things grounded, I wasn't worried. But that was last week, Harriet. The situation has clearly changed." I sat back in my chair, processing the weight of her words. I had been so focused on preparing for my retirement that I had missed the larger shift happening around me. The next morning, I was in the garden trying to process everything. Gardening had always been my therapy, but today no amount of pruning could calm the chaos in my mind. Thomas was watching me from the kitchen window, but he knew I needed space. My phone rang. It was Jeffrey Williams from Trevanta Corp. He already knew what had happened. "Charles called me last night. We're both skipping golf today," he said somberly. I sighed, sitting back on my heels. "I was going to tell you both today. It's not the end of the world. These things happen." "But this isn't about you," Jeffrey cut in. "We're all concerned about Damon's direction. He's moving away from relationship-based investments, and your firing just confirms our fears about his judgment." I felt a wave of dread. This wasn't just about me. It was about the future of the company. "Charles called me after our last game," Jeffrey continued. "He's worried about Damon's strategy. He's already considering pulling out." Just then, my phone beeped with another call. "Charles." "Harriet, it's bad," Charles said immediately. "Marion Bay is pulling out of the funding round, $80 million gone. Ella Lennar is doing the same. We're looking at a shortfall of $180 million. I was stunned. "You didn't need to do that?" "I did," he said firmly. "Damon has dismantled everything. He's alienated everyone who's been here for decades. We need your help." The board was in emergency session. They wanted me to reach out to Charles, Ella Lennar, and Jeffrey to see if they would reconsider their positions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that things had gone too far. They've placed Damon on administrative leave," Charles added. "The board wants you to help us fix this." I felt the weight of his words. "What do you want from me?" "We need you to step in, Harriet," he said. "Our investors trust you, and we're asking you to help restore that trust." I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew one thing. It wasn't just about me anymore. The company, my career, everything I had built, it was all hanging by a thread. I needed time to think, and I needed to speak with Charles, Ella Lennar, and Jeffrey, not as a messenger, but as someone who understood the stakes. A few days later, Charles, Ella Lennar, and Jeffrey came to my home. The conversation was unlike anything we had shared before. We weren't discussing investments or strategies. We were talking about Calridge's survival. Charles was blunt. "I'm not putting another cent into Calridge with Damon Shore at the helm." Ella Lennar agreed. "I can't justify reinvesting either. The board enabled Damon, and I'm not sure they won't do the same with the next CEO." Jeffrey added, "This isn't just about you. It's about the future of the company. We need someone who understands relationships, not just algorithms and quick returns." I sat back, processing their words. Calridge was in crisis. Damon's decisions had torn down everything, and now the company was on the edge. "I'm not going back to fix this just to be a figurehead," I said, standing my ground. Ella Lennar leaned forward. "Harriet, you've always put others first. Maybe it's time you put yourself first." Charles chimed in. "You should be CEO, not just to fix the mess, but to restore what Calridge was built on." I felt the weight of the decision. I had planned my retirement, but could I really walk away and let everything crumble? The idea of stepping back into leadership was overwhelming, but this might be my last chance to save what I had spent over 3 decades building. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "But it has to be on my terms." After they left, Thomas asked, "What will you do?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but if I go back, it will be because I believe in this company, not to fix someone else's mess." Thomas smiled. "Then do it. Do it for you." For the first time in a long time, I realized that I had the power to take control of my future, and that felt like the right choice. The next few days were a blur. I met with Charles, Ella Lennar, and Jeffrey at my home, not in the usual setting of the golf course or a fine restaurant, but in my living room. It felt more personal this time, and I knew that the decision I made would have lasting consequences, not just for me, but for everyone involved. Charles was the first to speak as soon as he sat down. I don't care what the board offered you, Harriet, he said bluntly. I'm not putting another cent into Calridge with Damon Shore at the helm. Eleanor nodded in agreement. I can't justify recommending Zentron's reinvestment either. The board enabled Damon's decisions, and I'm not sure they won't do the same with whoever they hire next, Jeffrey added. We've all been concerned about the direction he's taking. This isn't just about you, Harriet, but about the future of Calridge. We need someone who understands the business and the value of relationships, not just algorithms and quick returns. I sat silently, absorbing their words. It was clear that they were all on the same page, but what was even clearer was that Calridge, the company I had helped build, was in a deep crisis. Damon's approach had pushed us to the edge, and now it felt like the company was a sinking ship. I'm not going back for them, I said finally, breaking the silence. I'm not going back to fix things just to be a figurehead while they search for another CEO. They all looked at me, their eyes full of expectation, but I wasn't sure if I had the strength to go back. My career had been devoted to this company, but I had already made plans for my retirement. Thomas and I had plans for travel, for a life that didn't revolve around Calridge. But Eleanor, ever perceptive, leaned forward and said, You've always put others first, Harriet. Maybe it's time you put yourself first. Charles spoke next, his voice softer than usual. If you were to consider staying, it should be on your terms, not theirs. You've earned that right. You should be CEO, Harriet, not just some transitional figure. My heart raced as I absorbed their words. The idea of taking on the role of CEO after everything that had happened felt overwhelming. I had planned my retirement, but I had also built something important. This company, these people, had been my life for over 3 decades. Could I really walk away and let it crumble? Or did I owe it to my team, to my investors, to fix what had been broken? I'm 64 years old, I said, almost to myself. I was planning to retire. Why would I take on this responsibility now? Eleanor's gaze softened. Age brings wisdom, Harriet, and you've got more wisdom than anyone else in that room. You understand the importance of relationships and long-term growth. That's what Calridge needs right now. Not someone who's going to tear down everything you've built. I sat back, lost in thought. The idea of becoming CEO again, of stepping back into a leadership role, was daunting. But at the same time, I realized that this might be the last chance I had to ensure Calridge's survival, to protect the legacy I had built over the years. I'll think about it, I said finally. But I need to do it on my terms. If I go back, it will be because I believe in what this company can be, not because I'm being forced to fix someone else's mistakes. After they left, Thomas was waiting for me in the study, giving me the space to process. What will you do? He asked, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of concern. I don't know, I replied honestly, sitting beside him. But I know one thing. If I go back, it will be for me. I'm not doing it to fix things for Damon or for the board. I'll do it because I believe Calridge can be something better. Thomas smiled, a small but reassuring gesture. Then do it. Do it because it's what you want, not because anyone else expects it. And if it's not the right fit, then we'll go to Italy, just like we planned. I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I think it's time to take control of my own future, don't you? That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something. For the first time in years, I wasn't just the dependable one, the one who always fixed everything for everyone else. I was going to do something for me. And that felt like the right step forward. The following morning, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my blazer. I had made my decision. I was going back to Calridge, not as a figurehead, but to take control. This company had been my life for over 3 decades, and I wasn't going to watch it fall apart without doing everything I could to restore what we had built. Thomas gave me a reassuring smile as I walked into the kitchen. You sure about this? He asked. I have to do this, I replied, my voice firm. But it's on my terms now, not theirs. I had made the call to the board late last night after speaking with Charles, Eleanor, and Jeffrey. I was going to walk into that room today, not with the intention of fixing their mess, but to reshape the company into what it was always meant to be. The investors, the relationships, and the long-term growth, I was going to bring it all back. When I entered the Calridge building, the atmosphere felt different. I had always walked through those doors with confidence, knowing that my work spoke for itself. But today, I was here to reclaim control, to remind everyone of what truly mattered. I took my seat at the boardroom table, the same familiar room where I had spent years leading discussions, making decisions, and defending the firm's best interests. But this time, it felt different. The board members, all eyes on me, seemed to sense the change in the air. Philip was the first to speak. "Harriet, we're glad you could join us today," he said, his tone more cautious than before. "I'm not here to fix things the way you want me to," I said, my voice steady but filled with resolve. "I'm here to put this company back on track, on my terms." Victoria and the others exchanged glances, clearly surprised by my directness. But I wasn't going to back down. This was about more than just a position. It was about restoring the values that made Calridge the respected firm it had once been. "Here's what I propose," I continued, pulling out a document and sliding it across the table. "I'm not taking the interim CEO position. What I want is to create a new role, Chief Relationship Officer. This will be a permanent position focused on maintaining and building the relationships we've spent decades developing." There was a stunned silence as the board members read through the proposal. I could see the wheels turning in their heads, trying to process the shift in power I was suggesting. "You want to create this position?" Philip asked, his eyebrows raised. "Yes," I replied. "This company needs someone who values relationships and long-term growth over short-term profits. If you want me to help restore investor confidence, this is how it's going to be done." Victoria spoke up next, her voice soft but measured. "And if we agree to this, what do you want in return?" "I will reach out to Charles, Eleanor, Jeffrey, and our other major investors to reinstate their funding commitments," I said. "But I need you to create this position permanently in the company's charter. And I'll agree to stay for 1 year, long enough to train my successor and ensure this new approach is embedded." The board exchanged glances, and I could see that they were considering my proposal. It was bold, but it was also exactly what Calridge needed, a balance of innovation and respect for the relationships that had made the firm successful in the first place. "One more thing," I added. "Damon Shore should be given a role that suits his talents without giving him control over client relationships." The room fell silent as the board took in everything I had said. It was clear that they had expected a different kind of offer, but I wasn't going to settle for anything less than what I believed was right for the company. Philip finally spoke. "Harriet, we'll take this under consideration. We'll discuss it further and let you know." I nodded, standing to leave. "Take your time. But understand this. If you want me back, it will be on my terms. No more compromises." The next few days were a whirlwind of back-and-forth discussions. The board members reached out to me with questions, and I spent hours on the phone with Charles, Eleanor, and Jeffrey, keeping them informed about the changes I was pushing for at Calridge. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I doubted myself, when the weight of it all seemed too much. But each time I felt that doubt creeping in, I reminded myself why I was doing this. It wasn't just for Calridge. It was for the people who had stood by me for all these years, and for the legacy I wanted to leave behind. On the 5th day after my meeting with the board, I received a call from Philip. His tone was guarded, but there was an undercurrent of relief in his voice. "Harriet, we've discussed your proposal, and we're prepared to move forward with it." I leaned forward, my heart racing. This was it. "You're creating the position of Chief Relationship Officer?" "Yes," Philip confirmed, "and we're willing to make it permanent in the company charter. You'll have full authority over all client-facing operations, with board voting rights." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "And Damon?" "Damon will remain on administrative leave, and we're finding a new role for him. He won't have control over client relationships. We agree that's crucial." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This wasn't just a win for me. It was a win for the values I had always believed in. The board had listened. They understood that the foundation of Calridge was built on relationships, not just numbers and quick profits. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. "I'll start reaching out to our investors immediately." The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and emails. I worked tirelessly, reaching out to Charles, Eleanor, Jeffrey, and the other key investors, explaining the changes we were making at Calridge and assuring them that the company was now focused on rebuilding trust. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Marion Bay, Zentran Global, and Travanta Corp all agreed to reinstate their funding commitments. The relief was palpable, but I knew this was only the beginning. The real work had just begun. As I sat in my office, reviewing the updated financials and investment agreements, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Calridge was back on track, and I had helped steer it away from the brink of disaster. But even more than that, I had taken control of my own future. This wasn't just about saving the company. It was about defining what kind of leader I wanted to be, and about making sure that Calridge never lost sight of what truly mattered: its people. The next step was clear. I had to rebuild the company's culture, reestablish the trust that had been shattered, and ensure that the focus remained on long-term, sustainable growth. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. I wasn't doing this for the board, or for Damon, or for anyone else. I was doing this for Calridge, for the people who had made this company what it was, and for the legacy I wanted to leave behind. Как тебе сокращенная версия 7 части? The next few months passed in a blur. With my new role as Chief Relationship Officer, I set to work immediately. Rebuilding the trust with our investors wasn't an overnight task, but the momentum was on our side. The changes we had made, from reinstating key team members to shifting the company's focus back to relationship-based investments, were starting to show results. But it wasn't just about securing the funding or bringing investors back. It was about restoring the soul of Calridge. The corporate culture had been fractured under Damon's leadership. But now I was focused on creating a workplace that valued integrity, long-term thinking, and most importantly, the people who had built the firm. I held meetings with each department, listening to their concerns, providing guidance, and reminding them of the values that had always made Calridge successful. One afternoon, a few months into my new role, I stood in front of a room full of employees at our annual company-wide meeting. The atmosphere was different this time. There was a sense of unity, of shared purpose. It was a far cry from the tense, uncertain mood of just a few months ago. Change is inevitable in any organization, I began, my voice steady. But how we manage that change determines whether we grow stronger or lose what makes us special. I paused, letting my words sink in before continuing. We've been through a lot recently, and it's been hard on all of us. But I believe we're stronger now. I've always believed that Calridge's success was built on the relationships we fostered with our clients, with each other, and with the communities we serve. And that's what we're going to continue to prioritize moving forward. The room was quiet, but I could feel the energy in the air. Hope, optimism, and a renewed sense of commitment. I knew that the hardest part of rebuilding was behind us, but there was still much work to be done. In the months that followed, I worked alongside Laura, my former assistant, who had now been promoted to lead our client services team. Her loyalty and understanding of the company's core values made her the perfect fit for the role, and I felt a deep sense of satisfaction watching her step into leadership. The funding round, which had once seemed in jeopardy, was now a success. We had not only met our target, but exceeded it by 20%, thanks to the renewed confidence from our investors. As I sat in my office reviewing the final numbers, I couldn't help but smile. The firm was thriving again, and it was thriving on the principles that had always guided us: relationships, integrity, and sustainable growth. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was about something deeper. We had rebuilt something more valuable than just a business. We had rebuilt trust, and with it, a sense of purpose. One evening, as I sat on the balcony with Thomas, reflecting on the journey, I realized that the most important part of this whole experience wasn't the success we had achieved, but the peace I had found. For years, I had been defined by my work, by the role I played at Calridge, but now I had learned to put myself first, to value my own happiness and well-being. The career I had built was important, but it didn't define me. And as I looked toward the future, I knew that whatever came next, whether it was continuing to lead Calridge, mentoring the next generation, or simply enjoying life with Thomas, I would be ready. The following year, I finally retired as planned. Laura took over the role of Chief Relationship Officer, and I had every confidence that she would continue to uphold the values that had made Calridge successful. Thomas and I took our long-awaited trip to Italy, where we spent our days exploring vineyards and museums, free from the weight of corporate life. As I sat in the quiet of a Tuscan villa, I reflected on the journey I had taken. Not just the career, but the lessons learned along the way. My greatest revenge hadn't been in bringing down the man who had dismissed me so thoughtlessly. It had been in rebuilding something lasting, something that would outlive us both. Calridge was thriving under its new leadership, and I had finally secured the legacy I had worked for, one based on relationships, integrity, and a future that wasn't built on the whims of any single individual. It was built on the foundation we had all created together, and that to me was the greatest success of all.